Hello, everybody. This is Megan,
And this is Alana.
and welcome to Tea Time Crimes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tea Time Crimes, where Alana brings the tea and I bring the crimes. However, we're going to flip the order today because it is a second parter. So, unless you have anything off the top, Alana, I will just dive right in.
Go for it. Shortest intro ever.
Yeah, I know. Put this in the record books. So, today's episode will cover part 2 of the Highway of Tears series. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the first episode, go back. But for those of you who don't know and just want to forge ahead out of order, fine. Alana's going to freak out, but that's all right. The Highway of Tears is a stretch of road in British Columbia in between the cities of Prince Rupert and Prince George that covers 725 kilometers. Within this geographical area, multiple girls and women have gone missing. In our last episode, we covered 9 murdered or missing victims and 2 who are technically outside the Highway of Tears investigation. And what I mean by that is these cases are recorded as far back as 1969 to present day. But in 2005, a special task force was created to determine if a serial killer or serial killers were at work. The original cases included in this scope covered 7 instances of homicide or abduction that met the following criteria. 1, the victims must be female. 2, they must have been last seen or discovered within a mile of Highway 16, 97, or 5. 3, they must have been engaging in, quote, high-risk behavior, something like hitchhiking, and investigators must believe that foul play is suspected. The task force created is referred to as E-PANA, E standing for the detachment assigned to the cases, and then PANA is the name of the Inuit god who watches over souls as they pass. So 6 out of 7 of the females on that original list were Indigenous girls or women. The highway, technically Highway 16, contains over 20 First Nations communities along it, which means geographically, Indigenous women are at a higher risk. However, we've talked about it in the past, and this is the entire reason why you're agreeing to do this series, because it's not your usual cup of tea. We've talked about the issues Indigenous women face being 3.5 times more likely to be victims of violence than non-Indigenous women, and we did that episode about Savannah Greywind. Go back and listen if you haven't had a chance. And according to the book Highway of Tears, a true story of racism, indifference, and the pursuit of justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls by Jessica McDermott, Indigenous women are also 6 times more likely to be murdered than non-Indigenous women.
Let that number sit on you for a second. Like that's insane. It's 600%. 6 times.
You can't fathom it. Now, the book I mentioned, read it, go out and get it. I've used a ton of sources for these episodes, but that book is huge in this part too, because it covers sweet, precious memories and details of the victims we're going to cover today that the articles don't have, that the newspapers didn't grasp, and this book does. Plus, this book is amazing at going through and quoting studies about this issue, but also quoting studies about the law enforcement and what people are trying to do and how this is trying to improve. And it gives a really holistic picture of this issue with a lot of the important history, more in depth than we're going to be able to cover today. So please, I'm going to mention it, reference it several times, but please go out and grab it. Before we get started, I also want to call out 2 documentaries that I think are just important. I use them for my references, but also they're just important to take a look at. Highway of Tears, The Unsolved Serial Murders of Aboriginal Women, directed by Matthew Smiley. And then We Were Children, which is about residential schools, and we'll touch on that a bit today, directed by Tom Wilichudik. And apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. So we know Indigenous women are one of the most vulnerable populations. But there are other factors that need to be considered for the Highway of Tears, because the crimes of violence that we're talking about are paired with systemic and socioeconomic issues that are then set in this weird geographical isolated spot.
Right.
Unemployment rate is high among many First Nation communities. The Highway of Tears documentary I just mentioned reports some areas are as high as 90%. So several of the people are along the highway are struggling with finances below the poverty line.
Yeah.
Which makes things like hitchhiking, which we talked about in the previous episode, just absolutely necessary if they need to, and they also have less services available to them, right? They need to go to a specialist or a doctor or anything within that realm, some sort of social services. They need to be able to get there. And it's not going to be just in their town down the street. They have to get there and they don't have a car. Public transportation is not available, so they hitchhike.
Mm-hmm.
Reports have also been released in an attempt to capture the number of missing or murdered women in recent years. And several sources, this is Indigenous missing or murdered, several sources have numbers around 1,100 or 1,200, but that's believed to be wildly low. And some people have taken it upon themselves to travel town to town because these towns are remote and tiny and hear the stories of people who have lost loved ones and kind of create this book of lost names. Yeah, and in doing so, they estimate that the numbers could be as high as 4,000.
God, that's gutting.
It's unbelievable. So today we're going to start with the stories of the first 7 included in the Highway of Tears investigation, which started in 1990. I know we're technically skipping the 80s, but we're going to circle back and see how those stories are woven through these as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start there. Delphine Nicole, June 1990. Now, Delphine was the baby of the family, part of the Wet'suwet'en tribe. She was born in Smithers, British Columbia. For the first 11 years of her life, she lived with her dad on a farm, and she loved it. She rode horses. She loved to be outside. She loved animals. She was very creative. She was drawing all the time, and her father's bedroom was kind of plastered and, kid pictures that she'd done, which is so sweet.
Yeah.
And she was described as smart and inquisitive and just an adventurous child. But in 1986, Delphine's father passed away, and Delphine had to leave the farm.
Oh.
She moved in with her mother, Judy, and her stepfather, who lived in a nearby town. So she didn't have to move far, and she does have family. But Judy herself had health issues. She was a survivor of residential schools, which is starting to be talked about in these cases as a theme. Not that it didn't happen additionally in the first episode to some of the people we touched on, but it's starting to be a real theme because a lot of the missing women and girls, their parents were survivors of residential schools.
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know, again, We Were Children is a documentary I mentioned. Watch it. But for anybody who doesn't know, these schools were created to, quote, assimilate Indigenous children to European ideals.
Yeah. So strip them of their culture, their language, their identity, and make
their family.
them, everything. It's heinous and horrific. It's they're still finding mass graves of children who wouldn't conform or would be too difficult
or didn't survive the conditions.
Yeah,
they were torn. These children were torn from their families at all ages, but lots of times 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a minute. If the government said, "Hey, you're not," instead of saying, "Hey, your kid has to start kindergarten at 5," they say, "Hey, we're going to come take your child from you, and you'll see them when they're done."
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not, if they survive it. The children were not allowed to visit their parents, or if they did, it was very infrequent. They were not allowed to speak anything but English. And that's all damaging enough, right? Just to be torn from your family, from everything you've known. That's awful. But in addition, they were taught that everything that they knew and had learned to date was wrong.
Yeah.
And not just wrong, but bad.
Right.
Which does irreparable harm to a child's psyche.
Yeah.
Like at your core, you're wrong and you need to be a different way.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable emotional abuse. And we've talked about the generational trauma in our previous Hartford Witch Panic episode. I quote that study about prisoner of war survivors.
Yeah.
And the same science can be applied here for the survivors of the residential schools,
so
right?
Deep.
These schools were mandated for First Nation children, and they are taken from their families. And depending on the children, they may or may not speak any English at all. But that didn't matter. When they arrived, if they didn't speak and understand English, they were punished.
Yep.
They literally might not know it. They might have not. I mean, imagine if you had to go to Canada and speak French. We know how that went.
Yeah, it didn't go well. Real quick.
Yeah.
There's a TV show called Reservation Dogs on Hulu or FX. I mean, both. And it's really great. It's all like pretty much all Indigenous people working on it and in it. And season 3 deals a lot with the trauma of these residential schools. And there's a great episode that I can link somewhere that covers, I mean, it's fictional, but it's based on real events, like how it was for the kids, like, they're just speaking gibberish and they're terrified and they just see the scary things happen to other kids and just the building of fear.
Yeah, they don't give them it's not like they teach them English or give them any time. It's on the first day if they're not speaking English.
Right.
Then
and don't get caught speaking your native language because you're...
Exactly. The documentary I mentioned as well follows the story of a young girl and a young boy who survived the treatment they endured. And it's just heartbreaking. But it's absolutely worth a listen. And I understand every experience might have been a little different or different things might have happened. But in this documentary, when the children arrive, they are scrubbed with a harsh chemical bath and their hair is cut off.
Yes.
Already unbelievably dehumanizing and giving the message that something's wrong with you.
Right. And it depends on which, First Nation or which cultures. Like that's long hair can be indicative of something really important culturally.
Yeah, exactly. And then they are given basically meager portions of porridge, which their body's not used to. They haven't had porridge. So they
eat corn.
They're
beans.
eating vegetables and fruits and the fruits and vegetables are available, but they are given to the staff. Right? Not to the children. They're physically abused. A lot of them are sexually abused, subject to cruel punishments like kneeling on the ground and holding your tongue out for long periods of time, being closed in a closet for days. It's unbelievable. Just watch the documentary. These stories deserve to be heard. And this is important in the story we're telling today because it's another piece of the puzzle. Indigenous women face mental illness, poverty, homelessness at higher rates than non-Indigenous women as a direct effect of these residential schools and before that, colonization. The generational effect is going to take just decades to completely unravel. But again, this is part of the struggle that Indigenous women face. Even when factors above our control, violence is still more prevalent. Yeah. So there's more going on than just the trauma they've endured.
Right.
And I think it's
a baseline.
Yeah. It's just added onto it. I think it's important to understand a little bit of what these families, cultures, communities are experiencing when they step into the worst moments of their lives by losing their loved ones, right? It's important to understand everything they're bringing with them and how it would affect them and shade their perception. It also helps give a perspective on the strain that these families, these Indigenous families have with the police because the police were the same people that took them away from their parents. I know it's not the same person, right? It's a different person. But you think about that, you're 4 years old, that uniform arrives, it rips you from your parents, it takes you away, it takes you from your sisters, from your mother, from your father. You're not going to be feeling happy and trusting with that person coming when your daughter disappears, right?
Yeah.
So it's another big piece of it. But back to Delphine, she's moving to town with her mother. It's a hard adjustment. She misses the farm. She misses her father. And to cope, she starts spending more and more time away from home. And unsupervised, Delphine starts getting in a little bit of trouble with the police. Nothing major, minor offenses like petty theft or mischief. I don't even know what that means. But, that's what it said, mischief. Just, being a kid. By 1989, Delphine was actually sent to, they called it a rehabilitation facility, but it's like a youth facility, a juvenile detention center for breaking the law. Again, Indigenous girls and women are also incarcerated at a higher rate than non-Indigenous.
Yep.
But while she is away, she remained in contact with her family. She's writing long letters to them. When she came home in the spring of 1990, she also had a whole portfolio of artwork that she'd created while she was away. And she was in pretty good spirits. She survived it and probably wasn't the best time of her life, but she was home. Unfortunately, around the same time that she came home, Judy, Delphine's mother, had a routine operation that ended up with severe complications. Judy ended up in a coma for months.
What?
Mm-hmm. To receive proper care, Judy was also kept at a hospital in Prince George, which was 4 hours away from home. Delphine moves in with her uncle, who lived close by, and went as often as she could to visit her mother, often hitchhiking to make the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the afternoon of June 14th, Delphine, who's 15 at the time, just to give you a reference, she's home with her uncle and she heads into town to hang out with her friend, Crystal Grenke, and a few other girls. Later that night, the group's at a gas station off of Highway 16. They're getting ready to, call it a night.
Mm-hmm.
Delphine surprised the group by inviting them back to her house to spend the night with her, something she'd never done before, so it struck them as strange.
Okay.
And Crystal, who she's hanging out with, is only 12. And Delphine's usually pretty protective of her because she's so young and makes her get home by curfew to make sure she goes to school the next day. She kind of looks out for her. That night, none of the girls are able to go to Delphine. So Delphine says no problem. She calls her uncle, although some sources will say she called her stepfather. I'm unclear. It's probably a mix of both because I bet sometimes her stepfather was at the hospital. And she tells her uncle, I'm headed home. Then she goes to the highway and hitchhikes. She's done it probably 100 times before.
Yeah.
She never makes it home to her uncle's. Delphine's family is concerned when she doesn't return because she'd called and said she was on her way. Heartbreakingly, this is not the first female that's gone missing in this family.
What?
Delphine's the only one on the Highway of Tears list, but she's the third person in the family to disappear. Less than a year before, Delphine's cousin Cecile, also 15, took a bus to Vancouver to visit her mother and vanished. A year before that, in August of 1988, Delphine's cousin Roberta, who was 19, she'd gone camping for the weekend with friends. She was headed home to meet her sister. She never arrived. Now, I can't possibly imagine what the family is thinking, but I have to bet that those two cases are swirling around in their brain as Delphine hasn't come home.
Of course they are.
When the police are contacted, they are confident Delphine is a runaway. But people aren't convinced, and here's why. One, she just called her uncle to say she was headed home. Why would she do that if she was going to run away? That seems silly.
And she invited her friends over.
So that was number two. She invited her friends to spend the night. Also, why would you do that? 3, her mother, Judy, is still in the hospital, and Delphine visited her regularly and promised to help take care of her when she got out. So she had this long-term plan and promise with her mother and was waiting for that. 4th, she went missing on the Highway of Tears. I don't
Put
think
it together, y'all. Put it together.
So with little cooperation from the police, friends and families just start searching on their own.
Yep. And that very common thing that happens in these communities
very common
because
thing.
They won't get the help they need.
They attempt to have flyers made. Nobody thinks about this, the actual cost of resources like this, but it was hundreds of dollars to have flyers printed, and they couldn't afford it
back then, for sure.
The police don't believe foul play is a factor, and there's next to no media coverage.
Bro.
The first article I find is in the Vancouver Sun on September 15th, 3 months after Delphine went missing.
3 months?
Mm-hmm. Asking the public to come forward with any information. I could not find anything.
It's a little fucking late.
I could not find anything again until April of 1991.
I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good job, folks.
In 1992, so 2 years later, Judy is still looking for her daughter.
Of course.
Judy calls Rhonda Morgan, who's the founder of the Missing Children Society of Canada. Now, Rhonda Morgan is kind of a badass in her own right. She used to work for a bunch of organizations helping provide resources for lost children, but she just provided the resources and she wanted to be in the search. She wanted to help find children. So she starts her own thing. She pairs up with former law enforcement, rescue dogs, private investigators. Pretty cool. Rhonda sends a private investigator to Smithers to investigate. And in speaking to witnesses, he learned that a bloody shoe had been found near the area where Delphine went missing.
Oh.
The society went to do their own search, but nothing more was found. I mean, it had been 2 years.
Yeah. But imagine if that had happened earlier.
Right.
But
within
also,
48 hours.
I feel like if you are born with the name Rhonda, you're destined to be a badass. Like, have you ever known a Rhonda that's not a badass? No.
Never known a Rhonda.
I guess not a super common name anymore, but
I'm be on the lookout now.
Watch out.
She's in a lot of these cases in the 90s.
Good for her.
The society goes to search anyway, right? They can't find anything. They start finding witnesses, and A witness says that Delphine got into a red sports car that night, but they can't locate it. That's the best they can do.
Like 2 years ago we got this.
Today, Delphine Nicole is still considered missing. She is described as fair skin, dark brown hair, hazel eyes. She stands about 5'3", and she has a scar on her temple. Her case is unsolved. Ramona Wilson, June 1994. Ramona Wilson was also from Smithers, the same town as Delphine. Jeez. They were actually born in the same hospital, just years apart. Ramona was born February 15th, 1978. Matilda Wilson, Ramona's mother, had 5 kids, and Ramona was the youngest, and she was surprised as all get out to find out she was pregnant because she'd been told she couldn't have any more children.
Oh.
Yeah, so she found out the news. She thought she maybe was coming down with something, and then the doctor's like, actually, you're pregnant. She found out the news, and then she was just pleasantly surprised, and her oldest child was a girl, and the only girl in the family, and Brenda was pumped. She wanted a little sister. She'd been praying for a little sister. Here it was. When Ramona was born, it just sounds like all of the older siblings just doted on her, and she kind of infused this family with a newfound joy and love, and they all were really close. Now, as a young girl, Ramona had dreams of becoming a psychologist. She said this as young as 12. She was determined to be the first member of her family to go to college. She was active in sports, and she had a job as a dishwasher at a local diner named Smitty's. Now, being born in the same hospital as Delphine was not the only connection to the missing girl. There were several that are coincidences. Ramona also was friends with Crystal Grenke, then 12-year-old. Now, Crystal's a little older, so Crystal and Ramona are about the same age. And the two girls would hang out, and they'd cut class, but they usually didn't do anything bad. They just would cut class and go walk in the woods or go get a cup of coffee and talk. Mm-hmm. And like Delphine's mother, Judy, Ramona's mother, Matilda, was also a survivor of residential schools.
Yeah, I imagine most of that generation is.
Yeah, Matilda had been taken at 5 and subject to multiple forms of abuse. Her name was taken from her, and she was given a number and called by her number, which is another common experience. Ramona's grandparents had all 5 of their children taken away for these schools.
Jesus.
When Matilda finally returned home years later, her parents were struggling with alcoholism.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been self-medicating after losing all of their kids.
That's so fucked.
I can't even wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, someone's going to stop by and come take your son and change his language and strip you away. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Matilda married very young. She married at 15. She had 5 children by age 21. Brenda, who I mentioned, and then the 4 boys. And she became widowed at 25. And then right? And so then she moves to Smithers, and she has Ramona by surprise, like later in life.
Wow.
Yeah. But back to Ramona. The day of her disappearance was June 11th. Ramona came back to Smithers around noon from visiting her boyfriend. He lived in a nearby town. She stopped at Mr. Mike's Steakhouse to pick something up from a friend, and then she went home. It was graduation weekend, and so everybody in the town, I mean, it's a small town, right? Everybody in the town is celebrating for it, even if you're not graduating yourself.
Okay.
Ramona's uncle saw her on the main road walking, and he pulls over and he chats, and he's asking her, like, what are your plans for tonight? Where are you going? Do you need a designated driver? Want you to be safe. And she's, I got it. I'm good. I'm going to be, staying with Crystal, all this stuff. She goes home. She took a nap. She woke up for dinner. Her and her mother had takeout together. And then around 9:30, Ramona got a call and headed out. Now, Matilda said she was in great spirits. Not only was it graduation weekend and she was excited to go out and hang out with friends.
Yeah.
She'd also just found out that she received the summer job she wanted as a camp counselor, and she was really looking forward to it. So she's jazzed. She heads out.
Oh, I miss that feeling of like you're at the end of school
I know.
Like, things aren't mattering as much because like you're basically done with it and things are exciting. Everybody's happy. There's that like summer buzz.
Yeah.
That feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, I can perfectly picture it.
Especially in this part of the world where I bet summer is the most coveted time, right? Because you have such a hard winter. Like the weather's great. You get to see your friends. You've got a job you're looking forward to.
That buzz.
So she heads out. She sees a few people along the way, a couple neighbors and stuff. Some are just waves. Some she stops and chit chats too. So several people see her as she's leaving. The plan was for Crystal and Ramona to go to a dance about 40 miles from town. Now, the two had hitchhiked before, but
Okay.
lots of times they could just go downtown and find somebody who was also going there. And
Because it's a small town.
right, and just grab a ride with
Yeah,
somebody they
right.
know, not
Not a
hitchhiking, but
stranger,
just
yeah.
like, oh, you're going? Cool. Crystal's waiting for Ramona at this party, but Ramona never showed up.
Oh, no.
But again, it's the 90s. There's no cell phones.
No.
You know, a lot plans change. Ramona may have decided to go somewhere else. Crystal's not worried at all.
Okay.
Sunday morning, Ramona was still nowhere. Her mother thought she was with Crystal. Crystal thought she was with her boyfriend. She thought plans must have changed. She must be with her boyfriend. But then this boyfriend calls looking for Ramona. He first calls the house, is told she's with Crystal, then calls Crystal, and that's when the two of them think, oh, I thought she was with you. So the boyfriend and Crystal go to Ramona's house, hoping that maybe she came home and was, you know, just sleeping or something. She's still not there, but they don't say anything to her mother. They probably don't want to get her in trouble.
Oh.
Besides, Ramona was the dependable one of the group. She was always the one looking out for all the friends, making sure they didn't drink too much and taking care of them.
Okay.
So the thought that anything else had happened, other than Ramona just being a self-sufficient person taking care of herself and staying at a friend's house, is not even in their mindset yet. On Monday, they go to school. Crystal notices that Ramona's not there, but she's also aware that another friend they share is not there. And she thinks, oh, they must have probably spent the weekend together and they missed the bus to school because it's kind of far. I'm sure she'll be at work.
Is her mom not Wigan?
Not yet. So that afternoon, Crystal calls the diner because she knows Ramona would not miss her job. And the diner says she's not there.
Oh, boy.
Crystal knows then that something is wrong and she calls Matilda.
Okay.
And then Matilda calls work just to verify the story, realizes she's not there and that she never showed up to school. She calls the RCMP.
But it really was like that in the 90s. Like, things would change and, like, people would just assume more stuff and be like, oh, she's just there longer at her friends or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Police say, she probably just took off for a few days. Matilda knows that is not her daughter.
Yeah.
And it's already been 2 days or 36 hours or I mean, we don't know exactly. It's already coming up on that 48-hour mark. The family starts searching.
Yeah.
Siblings, extended family, they're calling friends and acquaintances repeatedly. A story didn't run in the paper until almost 2 weeks after Ramona disappeared. And this article, the one I read in the Interior News, made the possibility of Ramona having run away seem like the most likely option. Even though that's not what her family truly believed, and her bank account was untouched. Her last paycheck was still at work. She had only taken a very small bag just for the night. She hadn't taken a big backpack, of things. But just like with Delphine, there's no sign of Ramona anywhere. Around this time, finally, police bring in help from Prince Rupert and they perform aerial searches as well as ground searches. Still no leads. In July, right? Ramona went missing in June. In July, Missing Children Society of Canada, so Rhonda, she's back.
Yes.
She's the same woman who investigated Delphine's. She brings her crew as well as a psychic from Louisiana named Mary Martin. Now, the search did not find Ramona or Delphine. However, when Mary, the psychic, returned home, she reported back to Rhonda that she believed Ramona to be somewhere near the airport. She passed along several images, such as the sign Airport 4, and then she drew out a constellation of lights that was unusual, and she sent it to Rhonda. Rhonda and the team head back to the airport. They see a sign that says Airport 4. They go at night, and when they do, they see that pattern, that constellation of lights that Mary explained to them. But they still don't find any clues to help them find Ramona. However, the Missing Children Society of Canada puts up a $10,000 reward for any information on Ramona or Delphine.
So then a bunch of stuff comes in.
The police were unsure if the cases were linked or if it was this, the same assailant, but they did disappear both in June and both from Smithers. Yeah. They're years apart, but they're both at the same location at the same time. In August, police announced that a body had been discovered near Burns Lake on Highway 16. The Interior News ran a story about the findings with Ramona's picture. Investigators had confirmed, however, it was not Ramona. but an autopsy was being performed in an attempt to identify the body. And it was not long before they discovered that the body found along the road belonged to 15-year-old Roxanne Tiara, an Indigenous girl who had gone missing in June of 1994. Roxanne Tiara, June 1994. Now, Roxanne was born in Quesnel, British Columbia, and she was placed in foster care as a baby. And for the first few years of her life, she shifted back and forth between her bio mom and her foster mom. Eventually, her foster mother, Mildred, became her guardian. And Roxanne was described as just this happy-go-lucky kid and considered part of the family right from the start, right from when she was a baby. However, as she grew older, Roxanne started to struggle. Hanging out with, a tougher crowd is kind of the phrase that they used, and staying away from home. Now, Mildred fought for her daughter. She even took Roxanne to get psychiatric help, which I was surprised by for the 90s, and also because it probably wasn't easy. It probably wasn't easy to get there. She was really trying to get her the help that she needed, but Roxanne just kept pulling away. In the book Highway of Tears by Jessica McDermott, she quotes a study that also shows Indigenous children who are part of the child welfare system are twice as likely to be the child of at least one parent who survived a residential school. And more likely to have experienced sexual abuse or addiction, due in part to this generational trauma that they're carrying. These same children are also more likely to be in the criminal juvenile system as they grow older. So Roxanne is sadly fighting against the same statistics. And by the time she's 12, she enters into a youth facility due to minor run-ins with the law.
God, 12.
Here is where she also meets Crystal Grenke.
What the fuck?
I know. And Crystal's not involved in any way. She was questioned by police, just if anyone's thinking that, but it's just showing you how prevalent this is that one girl could know these same three girls across her life who went missing.
Poor Crystal too, though. Like, that's a lot to bear.
I know. Now, Crystal is now older than Roxanne, right? She tried to watch over Roxanne a little bit like Delphine had watched over her. But detention stripped Roxanne of her childhood. And when she was released, the struggles only intensified. Because we know now that putting children that young in a situation like that is not what they need. It has detrimental effects. And it's not commonplace now, but it was at the time.
Yeah.
After she's released, Roxanne starts spending a lot of her time in a town called Williams Lake, which, if you'll remember, is actually where Lavina Moody was murdered. Checking in with Mildred occasionally. She started using drugs, and she was sexually exploited by engaging in survival sex. At the age of 15, Roxanne decided she wanted to help. She wanted to make a change, and she told Mildred she was ready to go to rehab. She signed up to start treatment that summer. Before Roxanne could start, she disappears. On June 27th, 1994, Mildred said goodbye to Roxanne as she left the house. She's going to return to Prince George and come back with her things, and she's planning on starting treatment. It's hard to know exactly when Roxanne went missing. June 27th was the last time Mildred saw her alive, but some witnesses in Prince George saw her in the very early days of July. Mildred spent the summer searching on her own. By August, she was convinced this was not Roxanne's typical behavior, and she reported her missing August 11th, although some sources will say she reported her missing as early as July. Less than a week later, Roxanne's body was found near Burns Lake. Several tips were called in after the discovery, but nothing that led, to any suspects. In October of 1994, the local paper, the Quesnel Caribou Observer, published an interview with Rene Bernès. He's Roxanne's brother-in-law, so Mildred's son-in-law. He helped with the search. He spoke to Roxanne every week. He did not want her to be forgotten. And he did a lot to try and campaign to get her awareness about her case out there for her. He said he knew that she was traveling to Burns Lake that July weekend for a bluegrass festival. So he thinks that's where she was headed. He said, even though Roxanne was known to hitchhike, he would be surprised if she was alone. She always liked to hitchhike with a buddy and have somebody with her at all times. And his part of reaching out was he hoped that somebody had been with her. Maybe somebody had been with her and gotten away, or maybe somebody had been with her right before and they got separated. And he was, asking for any information. Go ahead and earmuff. Police believe that Roxanne was murdered at one location, the cause of death a gunshot wound to the head. And then her body was left along Highway 16.
Back.
Roxanne's case remains unsolved. A memorial service was held towards the end of October. Mildred was unable to have a proper funeral at the time, though, because Roxanne's birth mother was fighting for control over Roxanne's remains. The province quoted Mildred as saying, "Why should I have to fight for her body? No one should have to fight to bury a child they have raised."
Yeah.
End quote. Over 100 people attended the service to mourn the death of the young girl. And by the end of November, the courts ruled in Mildred's favor and she was allowed to put Roxanne to rest. But just a few days after Roxanne's burial, another girl goes missing.
Dude.
Alicia Germain, December 1994. Alicia Germain, sometimes Alicia Cunningham, left home as young as 12.
Jesus.
She was physically tiny, barely just like 5 feet tall.
Oh my God.
She's tough on the outside. But people who knew her said she was very sensitive. And she would spend a lot of her time at the Urban Coffee House, which sounds like it was a slam poetry kind of vibe.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's what she was, very sensitive. Alicia was in and out of group homes and just kept returning to the streets because I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant experience. She wanted her freedom. On the streets, she became addicted to drugs and was sexually exploited. Even with these struggles, by the end of 1994, Alicia had decided she wanted to return to high school and was working to handle her addiction. A few days after her 15th birthday on December 9th, Alicia attended a dinner in Prince George at the Native Friendship Center. And it's an annual event that they would do with the RCMP to try and help repair that relationship. The RCMP would serve food and they would hand out donated gifts for the holiday. After eating, Alicia opted to step out just for a minute. She said to an employee, "I'll be right back. Just need to go talk to my cousin. Please save me a gift." Around 11 p.m. that night, 3 teenagers came across Alicia's body on the grounds of an elementary school in Prince George. She'd only been missing for a few hours. She had been stabbed to death.
Oh my God.
Again, the leads investigators had were very sparse. There were no witnesses. A composite sketch was released of a possible witness, and that person was identified but had no helpful information. Police also located some of Alicia's things near downtown, and they started hunting that area. And from that, somehow they started asking for anybody who knew of a blue pickup with a canopy on the bed, and the canopy was homemade, so it must have been distinctive.
Okay.
And they were hoping to locate that vehicle. But nothing came of it. To this day, her murder also remains unsolved.
I don't get it. Like it's just there's no suspects. Like what's happening here? Like there's nothing. Are we not trying?
And nobody's
Is there
seeing
no
anything?
DNA? There's no fingerprints. Like I just don't understand. Like there's always some of your hair might like be on her.
Right, there should be forensic evidence. I know.
It just feels like there's just nothing.
We're very early on the forensic evidence. It's just kind of probably starting at this point, but also you need somebody to compare it to, usually, unless in the databases, they're being built out too. By April of 1995, Delphine and Ramona still have not been found. However, Ramona's case had received a tip from an unidentified caller.
What?
On January 27th, a man called in stating he knew what happened to Ramona and that it was possible to locate her.
What?
The police believe the person had more information and they were urging them to reach back out because I got the sense that they called, said something really quick and hung up. And so the police were asking for more information and for that person to please come forward. Matilda, also Mrs. Ramona's mother, wrote a letter to the newspaper pleading with this tipster. The letter Matilda published in the Interior News promised the tipster anonymity as well as the $10,000 reward that had been put up, right? Matilda writes, "I don't want her laying out there when somebody knows where she is. Please give the RCMP that important information. Only you can give us the rest and peace we desperately need."
I just can't imagine. There's got to be such a long period of time where your brain can't even go near the prospect of her just being somewhere dead or abused. Like, you know what I mean? So and just coming around to that and like your brain finally being able to grasp that. It's unthinkable.
Yeah. And then wanting to know because
Right.
not knowing, but then not wanting to know. It must be this just rip you
It's
apart.
torture.
Matilda continues explaining that absolute agony, which is what we talked about, of losing her daughter, and that it was just taking such a hard toll on her. She says, if I only knew the outcome, I'd probably be able to deal with it. But at this point, I'm just going crazy not knowing. The letter ends with one more plea for help and this final sentence. I am closing with tears and hope that you will contact the RCMP. With all my prayers, sincerely yours, Matilda Wilson. This letter was published on April 5th. On April 9th, 2 four-wheelers accidentally came upon the remains of Ramona Wilson. They'd gotten stuck in the mud. They went walking through the woods hoping to find a piece of wood to help pry them out. And during that search, they found Ramona. And this was near the airport.
Oh.
Her clothes and a rope were found, but her brand new shoes were missing.
Mm-hmm.
The discovery was made near the airport, which, if you remember, the psychic
Mhm.
had attempted to steer the investigation to at the beginning, which is interesting. More upsetting and more chilling is the fact that the anonymous tipster, who both Matilda and the RCMP, right, had been searching for, said that Ramona could be found near Lake Kathleen Airport area. The fact that somebody was correct makes me think they know exactly what happened to her. Either
And they did
they're
it.
the murderer, or they witnessed it, or they heard
Yeah.
somebody talking about it. Matilda told the Daily Herald Tribune, I am at peace with her being found now, but I will never be at peace with not knowing. I would really like to know who this person is and to pay for what he's done because he has taken the most beautiful child from our family.
Yeah.
After laying her daughter to rest, Matilda fell into a deep depression, and
Oh,
she
shit.
started to use alcohol to self-medicate. Brenda, the oldest child, was the one who pulled her mother out of it and begged her to come back to them, saying,
Yeah.
we're all sad, but we still need a mother too.
Oh.
And Matilda listened, and that summer she started the Ramona Wilson Memorial Walk. The first walk, Matilda traveled from Smithers to the site where Ramona was found as an action to remember not only her daughter, but all of the other girls and women who've been lost.
God, I can't imagine how painful that walk must have been.
That walk is still going on today. It's been modified over the years. Matilda herself modified it as she got older, but it's something that they still do today. 4 months after this first walk, it would happen again. Lana Derrick, October 1995. 19-year-old Lana was last seen on Saturday, October 7th, 1995, sometime around 3 a.m. A college student in nearby Houston, Lana had come home for the Thanksgiving weekend and then gone out with friends and disappeared. Since the early 80s, Lana and her mother, Marge, had lived with Marge's boyfriend, Darvin Hogan. And the home that they lived on had no electricity, no phone, but it was on a lot of land. And it seemed like the kind of place that people like to congregate. You had bonfires and sing around the fire, hanging out. Lana not only grew to love the place, but she also grew to love Darvin and called him dad, even though she still saw her biological father and was close to a stepsister and things like that. She loved Darvin and loved living on his property. Lana would spend most of her time outside. The property was big enough that they trained their dog, Randy, to always lead her home. So those two would go out together, and if she wasn't sure where she was, she would just say, Randy, home, and he'd trot on back. When Lana turned into a teenager, her family said there was the normal rebellion. And, she's always wanted to hang out with her friends. She always wanted to stay out late or do just normal teenager stuff. And it was commonplace for her to hitchhike as well, to meet up with these friends because they kind of lived out on the outskirts. But Lana was always serious about school and kept up her grades. By the end of high school, she decided that whatever she wanted to do, she knew it wasn't sitting behind a desk. She wanted to work outside and be outside. She was not afraid of hard physical labor. So she enrolled in Northwest Community College in the forestry program.
Cool.
The school is about 3 hours from home, and Lana would often visit on the weekends, even though she loved school. She loved the program. She loved being in Houston. The weekend of October 6th is Thanksgiving. So Canada Thanksgiving is the second Monday in October.
Right.
Yeah. Darvin and Marge were also in forestry, and they were out working through the weekend because they had to finish up a job before winter hits. Lana takes advantage of this downtime, and she went into town to visit friends. The story here gets a little confusing, so bear with me. Lana's biological father had passed along some money for her. He'd given it to her cousin.
Okay.
So Lana's in town. Her cousin pulls up, and she's hanging out with Lana's stepsister. It might have been former stepsister at the time, but the stepsister she was close to growing up named Clarice. And so Lana's talking to them, and she says, hey, can you just give the money to Clarice because Clarice lives in town? I'll just grab it on my way home because the cousin lived on the outskirts. So now Lana's stepsister has the money, and they make plans to meet up to get it.
Yeah.
Then they part ways. Lana goes to Gigi's nightclub, stays with friends, having a good time until closing. Clarice heads home with the money, goes to bed. Around 3 a.m., Lana knocks on the door.
Okay.
It was clear. I know. It was clear that Lana had been out having fun and she'd had a few drinks. But otherwise, she's in good spirits. There's nothing to say that she's disturbed or has seen anything or has witnessed anything or is, in danger. Totally normal interaction. She gives Lana the money. Lana heads out. October 7th, Marge and Darvin notice that Lana's not at home, but all of her things are still there. But Lana's 19, so she probably just stayed at a friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
They go back to work. By Monday, still no Lana. By Tuesday, Lana doesn't show up to school, and that's when they realize something's wrong because she wouldn't miss class.
Get Randy.
The couple start by calling around, calling all her friends. No one has seen her since early Saturday morning when she went to get that money. They go straight to the police. The RCMP is not concerned. Probably off with a guy, they say.
What?
Yep. That Friday, with very little investigation underway, the First Nation communities start their own search.
Yep.
Just like before, coming out all across British Columbia
have
to look for Lana. On October 18th, 4 sentences ran in the paper asking anyone with information to come forward. The article described Lana as 5'7", black hair, brown eyes, and glasses. The day Lana was wearing sneakers, a green sweatshirt, and black jeans. A week later, a second article appears kind of buried in the middle, reiterating that Lana's missing and her mother is worried, but nothing more. The police finally join in the initial search, but after 3 days, the police called the search off.
Why?
The family and First Nations volunteers say, bye, we're going to keep looking.
Yeah.
They searched until a record-breaking snowstorm stopped their ability to search the ground, and then they just shifted. They contacted, hospitals, any possible place. They just started calling, and said if they weren't able to go outside, they were going to do it from inside, and they had continued to search for her. They started putting information out to the media as well. On November 1st, Houston Today published a notice for a candlelight vigil on campus. That's where Lana attended college. But the article has no information about Lana other than her name. And from what I could find, it wasn't until December 5th that the idea Lana had met with foul play was even introduced. Before then, it was just, hey, if you've seen this girl.
What?
Hey, if you have any information on this case. But reporter Lindsay Kynes with the Vancouver Sun wrote a piece on all 5 of the Indigenous females missing since 1990. And Kynes took it a step further and printed what I'm sure the families were thinking with a subheading that read, quote, a serial killer is considered a possibility in 3 slayings and 2 disappearances.
Yeah.
In addition to floating this theory, the article started to express the frustration the families are also feeling.
Yeah.
Voicing their concerns that not as much attention or prioritization is being given to their cases as it is to non-Indigenous women.
Mm-hmm.
And studies in later years are going to back up exactly what the families are experiencing. In the book, Highway of Tears, it quotes a study by sociologist Kristen Gilchrist. It's titled Newsworthy Victims, Exploring Differences in Canadian Local Press Coverage of Missing, Murdered Aboriginal and White Women. So here's what the study has. Between 2003 and 2005, so again, this is conducted after this is happening, but it's exactly what they're describing. Gilchrist observed the media coverage between white women and Indigenous women. She took 6 cases, 3 white women, 3 Indigenous women, and collected all of the media coverage about them. Now, the 6 women, she tried to make them as comparable as possible, right?
Okay.
Similar background, similar education, all of that.
Got it.
she first took a look at the number of mentions. So it doesn't have to be this article or focus piece. It's just anytime it was mentioned. White females were mentioned 511 times. Indigenous females were mentioned 82 times. Straight up stories about the women, 187 for white women, 53 for Indigenous. In addition to obviously much less coverage, the stories are written differently. The articles that do feature white women are longer than those that feature Indigenous women, and they're also often written differently. And by that, what she explained was the articles featuring Indigenous women, they aren't negative, but they aren't as humanizing as the articles featuring white women.
I know what you're talking about.
The white women are described as girls and get memories. Memories are shared about them from
still used today
from their family members. Indigenous women or girls are often described as women, even if they're not technically women, right? This all matters because public opinion makes such a difference that if it spreads, I don't want to say the case becomes popular, but if the pressure is on more people are going to call in with tips. More people are going to remember things. More people are going to donate.
There's going to be a spotlight on the cops. Like
there's more resources. Yeah. There's more pressure. There's more of a wide net cast to get you clues that might help.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting study.
Now, throughout Kine's article, the police are pretty vague, which you'd honestly expect from an ongoing investigation. You're not going to lay everything out, right? They won't really confirm or deny everything. Kine's also reports that, the serial killer theory, the police have already thought about that, and they'd actually met earlier on to discuss that possibility themselves. And then we don't really know what the findings of that were.
Okay.
But right after this article was published, Houston Today quotes an RCMP sergeant as saying, quote, "Somebody has made an awful leap. It's a bit irresponsible if you ask me," end quote, meaning the serial killer connection.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So you can start to see that it's strained in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
It's not until 2006 that an article came out in the Globe and Mail where Fred Maley, a former RCMP officer and the investigator that Rhonda Morgan would often use, he came out and said he thought Roxanne, Alicia, Ramona, and Delphine were all victims of the same person.
That's a serial killer.
Near the end, I know he's agreeing with. Agreeing with him. Like, near the end of 1995, he had attended a meeting with various law enforcement officers, and they too had concluded that a serial killer was a possibility, at least for 3 of the girls. That group, that meeting, was not sure that Delphine was involved in it. A former behavioral analyst, Ron McKay, also backs up the theory, saying he believes that at least 2 of the murders were committed by the same person.
Wow.
People like Fred, there's many investigators who are dedicated and focused and all over this, while others are dismissive and making assumptions like she's a runaway and then wasting valuable time. And it's all sitting behind this ugly past and this perception. The fractured relationship between the First Nations and police is not only due to the generational abuse, and it's also because segregation also happened between colonization and residential schools. So there's just like another layer of it.
Yeah.
And I know we're talking about Canada, but I want to be clear. Obviously, this happened in the U.S. as well.
Very heavily.
This just happens to be set in Canada. You're going to hate this part, but there's even more to it because the distrust is also based on real life experience, not just, residential schools. All of those things happened in previous generations, but sexual exploitation was experienced by Indigenous women at the hands of some members of law enforcement during the 90s. Starting in 1992, so a few years before Lana Derrick's case, David Ramsey was a sitting judge. He started a decade-long terrorization of Indigenous girls that often appeared in his courtroom, which would render them powerless.
Jesus fuck.
He told them no one would believe them. He wouldn't be convicted until 2004, but it's at trial, it was discovered he'd been assaulting and raping Indigenous girls between the ages of 12 and 17 for a whole decade.
I hope, oh my God, all the bad things I wish on him. What an evil person.
This means even if this didn't happen directly to you, you're hearing about it. You know about it. There are ripples through the community. There's gossip. There's rumors. it's reaching more than the immediate victims.
Yeah.
This is a very complex issue, and we can only scratch the surface again. That's why I'm saying get that book, Highway of Tears, and read it. It creates just a very full picture of the past, as well as what people are doing to try and help it, as well as what the good people in this story are trying to do to make it better. Right? Because this is one man who hurt a lot of people. In addition to the fact is that the police are also understaffed, which is something it seems to pale in comparison to all the other stuff we've gone over. But this is a profession that's high risk for burnout, and turnover causes details to be lost no matter how good you are at taking notes, right? So even if you have somebody who's dedicated to the case, right? Somebody working 15-hour days and just absolutely all in.
You're just mentally exhausted, and you have to prioritize then. You have to triage cases probably.
There's only so much you can do. So Matilda, Ramona's mother, told the Terrace Standard, quote, he, and she's referring to the detective assigned to Ramona's case, can't follow up everything on his own. He needs help.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's an explanation, but it's another piece you have to consider.
Factor.
Yeah. If you have all of this going on and you don't have the resources to follow up on what you have.
There's no chance.
There's no chance. Back to Lana. By December, a hypnotist, Dr. Lee Poulos, was brought in to work with a witness who said they saw Lana at a gas station in the Thornhill area. If you remember, Thornhill was where Monica Ignis went missing.
Oh my God.
The witness reported they saw Lana in the back seat of a vehicle, which tells me that there's at least two people in the car then, because otherwise, why are you sitting in the back? Uber isn't a thing. Lana went to a gas station. She got out, went inside, came back, got in the car. By the time this witness came forward, the gas station footage had been erased.
Fuck. Come on.
However, the police created a sketch of two men in the car. And an article in the Lake District paper never alludes to the fact that there were two people in the car. They don't tell you that for a long time. The RCMP corporal interviewed says they won't release a drawing until they can find the person and determine on their own if witness or suspect. Which I don't understand. Can't you just say, don't they do that all the time? Like, hey, this person might be a witness.
You think so?
The article also draws a connection to the last time a hypnotist was used, which was, ironically, also in Monica Ignis's case. There's a lot of connections. This is before the E-PANA investigation has even been created, but either way, the girls are finding themselves with these connections.
Yeah.
On January 10th, 1996, the drawings were released of the two men, and the Terrace Standard provides a very detailed written description. It reads, male, native, late 30s, big, strong with a large stomach, black shoulder-length hair, big face, wearing a leather biker jacket. Second is, quote, male, part native, 30s, over 6 feet tall, skinny and pale with long arms, brown moderate length messy hair with a slight mustache, grungy looking dirty t-shirt and jeans. So those are the descriptions that the paper ran for the composite sketches. In the same article, they also described the car in pretty good detail. It's a blue-gray 4-door car about a 1987 in rough shape with a horizontal scrape along the bottom of the driver's door with paint peeling and rusting near the rear driver's tire.
It's like a great description of like very specific marks.
Yeah, that's right from the paper. The car was also loud. It had a light in the rear window. The brake light, one of the brake lights was broken, had a small decal. There's a bumper sticker on the driver's side, and there was something hanging from the rear view mirror. Very descriptive, but they don't find anything or nothing that they at least tell us that would solve this case. And Lana's family is feeling absolutely helpless. In the Highway of Tears, Darwin is talking about how everything you see or hear after something like this, you wonder if it could be related. Meaning you hear an animal in the woods and you think, could that animal be attacking Lana? You see a scrap of clothing on the highway. You think, could that be Lana's? Just everything. It affects everything from then on.
Yeah.
While all of this is going on, rumors are buzzing around town, but it's just talk. There's no real leads.
So nobody can identify the guys?
No. And if
Especially
they did,
if it's a small community, and like if they're part of the community, then
I think they may have and then ruled one of them out, but they don't give a lot of detail about it. During Lana's investigation, just to tie it back to episode 1, Monica Jack, the 12-year-old girl who went missing in the 70s, she's found and identified through DNA at this time. But for Lana, the only possible leads are as follows. A young man who is believed to be dating Lana had died by suicide the morning after Lana went missing, just like with the Ginny Sampar case.
That makes me feel he saw or did something.
Police say they've ruled it out as being connected, but it is something that they looked into for a long time, and it's odd. Witnesses saw, this one will infuriate you, witnesses saw a red van exiting a logging road the same day Lana disappeared. They called the RCMP as soon as they heard. But when the E-PANA investigation finally happened, years later, there was no record of this tip. And so they found out about it, and they went back to get more information, and the witnesses were dead because they were elderly. In October of 1996, a candlelit vigil was held for the 1-year anniversary of Lana's disappearance. An article in the Terrace Standard stated that thousands of hours of work had been put into the case, following up on over 250 tips. But at this time, they were down to only 30 possible leads.
Damn.
One of those was Lana's missing camera. Before her abduction, Lana had bought a Pentex camera model WP90, and it was never found. Investigators were hoping if it could be recovered, possibly there would be a clue. The day after the vigil, Lana's parents returned home to find their house had burned down.
What?
The article does not list the cause. It was a very small article in the paper. I have no idea what happened, but I can't imagine what that must have felt like, because they must have lost a lot of Lana's things in the fire. Today, Lana's case is considered an unsolved missing persons case.
It just sucks because I feel like there's just leads there, like that car and everything.
I know, very detailed. In the media, the connections of the cases appeared again in the Terrace Standard, published the fall of 1998. And the headline reads, "In the past 10 years, 6 Native women have been either murdered or gone missing from communities along Highway 16. End quote. Now, in addition to Delphine Nicole, Ramona Wilson, Roxanne Tiara, Alicia Germain, and Lana Derrick, Alberta Williams has been linked to this growing number of Indigenous women who are or girls who are missing or murdered. She won't be added to the E-PANA investigation until 2006, but she starts to be linked in the 90s. So I want to tell her story here. Alberta Williams, August 1989. In the summer of 1989, Alberta and her sister Claudia, they're staying in Prince Rupert for seasonal work. They worked at a fish hatchery, which is packing cans with salmon 12 hours a day. Jesus. Hard work. It's a temporary job at BC Packers plant, which also Ginny Sampar worked at. And it's coming to an end, and Alberta's really looking forward to going home. They live in Vancouver. She has a 24-year-old fiance back home. She's got a new job lined up, and she has plans to start college. August 25th marks the last day, and it's a chance to just unwind, right? You've been working 12-hour days packing salmon. Like, you probably want a burger and never see fish again and, like, hang out with your friends.
Yeah.
The Williams children had grown up in Prince Rupert, and their father was a fisherman, and their mother ran the household, but she would also work in the canneries because it's seasonal. It seems like seasonal work, right? So when it was available. Yeah. Then Claudia, their older daughter, moved to Vancouver, and the parents would send the younger children to go to high school there and live with their sister.
Oh, because
they wanted
better schools.
They wanted opportunity in better schools. Yeah. Alberta grew into a very sweet, generous woman, which is the ideals her parents had pushed for all of their children. But she kind of walked through life with a very open, trusting demeanor that made her other siblings a little nervous. And so they were a little bit protective of her. But the family would travel back to Prince Rupert, like I said, just as the seasons allowed for work, which is a very common thing to do. A lot of people did that because it paid really well. So you think about this mindset Alberta and Claudia are in. Summer's winding down. They've just finished a few months of hard work, and it's just like we talked about with Ramona. Like, it just is a feeling that's palpable to all of us.
Yeah.
Summer's coming to an end has a very distinct feeling as summer's beginning, right?
Yeah.
Later that evening, the sisters head to the Prince Rupert Hotel because there's a bar within the hotel called Popeyes. This is right off Highway 16. They spend the night there, laughing, talking, group of friends and family. They know everybody there. At some point in the night, Alberta finds a payphone, calls her brother Francis. She's not distressed. She's not upset. She just wants him to come join them.
Okay.
He thinks about it, but he is also a fisherman with their father, and he knows if he goes down to the bar, he will not make it out with his dad early in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, I wish I could, but I can't. Claudia and Alberta stay until closing. It's really crowded. There's music. There's laughter.
Yeah.
They're having a good time. At closing, everybody kind of just pours out.
Yeah.
Claudia and Alberta find each other among all of these people, and Alberta doesn't want to go home. She wants to go to a house party, and she's wanting Claudia to go with her.
Okay.
Before Claudia can even answer, she gets distracted by her ex-boyfriend. He's wanting to talk to her. She basically turns around and says, no, thank you. I don't want to talk to you. And then turns back to her sister, and Alberta's gone. So is the group of people Alberta was with. But still, Claudia is just the ultimate big sister. She waits around for 30 minutes just in case they miss each other. She goes and checks the bathrooms. She goes and checks the hotel lobby. She goes to the side street and looks down just to make sure she didn't want to leave if Alberta was waiting for her and just got distracted. Right. She waits for 30 minutes and then she says, okay, Alberta's not here. Clearly, she must have gone to the party. She's 24. I'll see her tomorrow. By the following morning, Alberta has not returned. Again, she's still 24, right? She probably spent the night with friends or family. That's who she's with. She's not with any strangers. She's with people she knows.
Supposedly.
Yeah. But they start to get anxious by the afternoon, Claudia and her mother, and they start calling around, hoping that they can find where Alberta is, and they're not able to. Sunday morning, there's still no sign of Alberta. She hasn't shown up. She hasn't called. Unbelievably un-Alberta-like. So Francis, her brother, and her father return, and they think that they need to go to the police. According to Claudia, the family was told to give it a few more days and see if Alberta came home.
That's not how this works.
A week of silence went by. The Williams family started their own search, again, just like all the others, creating missing posters, combing the area for any sign, just like the other cases. Less than a month after her disappearance, the Williams family's worst fears were realized when hikers found Alberta's body on Highway 60. Earmuff? Police believe Alberta had been the victim of sexual assault and that she had fought her attacker incredibly hard. The grief of losing Alberta was compounded by the fact that the family had also lost Alberta's sister, Pamela, 3 years before at a car accident involving a drunk driver. The discovery of Alberta's remains was the first mention I found of her in the papers on September 21st, and I didn't see anything else for the rest of the year. I don't have all the papers in the world, so I could be missing something, but it wasn't front page news. The police reported they had a suspect at one time, but they could not obtain a warrant because they didn't have the evidence to get one. And today, the murder of Alberta Williams is still unsolved.
Oh my God.
If you want to hear more about Alberta's case specifically, there is a podcast called Who Killed Alberta Williams by Connie Walker and Marnie Luke. I did not listen to it. I just know that it's there. I don't like to listen to podcasts before we do our own because then I get confused sometimes. But it's out there. It dives deep into the case if you want to listen to it. It even interviews the initial investigators.
Wow.
As Alberta's case started to get more coverage in the 90s, a decade later, and making these connections between the other missing women, because really she went missing right before Delphine.
Yeah.
It's not like it was, a decade before.
Right.
All of this attention and all of these links are being made by the families and by people in the media now. Another girl goes missing.
No.
Dina Bram, September 1999. September 24th, 16-year-old Dina is heading out for a night with her friends. Her birthday, so she'll be 17 that Monday, is coming up right around the corner. She's going to celebrate. As she leaves the house, she's wearing these silvery blue flare jeans and a blue jacket, and her dad says, "Happy birthday. Have a good time, beautiful." Dina throws her backpack over her shoulder, heads out. From there, Dina and her friends head to a party, and she's there till about 3:30 in the morning. And her parents are expecting her to sleep over at a friend's house. But for some reason that nobody seems to know, Dina decides to go home, and she starts to hitchhike home. At some point, it's assumed she was offered a ride or asked for a ride because mill workers in the area reported seeing Dina as late, or for them it would be as early as 4 a.m. as they were going to work. Typically, Dina would have called her parents as well instead of
Yeah.
hitchhiking, but for some reason she did not. Probably because she was only a few miles from home.
Okay.
When Dina didn't return on Saturday, her parents were a little bit worried, but, they weren't freaking out yet. By Sunday, they're calling everybody they could think of. They're starting a search themselves. By Monday, the family reported Dina missing on her 17th birthday. Police searched the area where Dina had been last seen, and by the end of the week, a dive team was called in because she'd been sighted near a body of water, but there was no sign of her. In November, the family had a benefit dance to raise money for a reward and encouraging anybody to come forward. On December 10th, a hunter discovered the remains of Dina Bram in close proximity to Pinnacles Park, about 10 miles from where she had last been seen alive, and only 50 yards short of where the search had stopped.
God.
Which is a fact that just ate away at her parents because
I can only imagine.
Her father said if we'd found her earlier, there just might have been more evidence to help solve her case.
Yeah.
As it stands, they were not able to determine exactly what had happened to Dina.
Gotcha.
Since that night in 1999, police have been searching for 2 males in hooded sweatshirts who were last seen walking on the same road.
I mean, good luck,
Because Dina was over a mile away from the main highway, her case is not officially included in the E-PANA investigation, even though the road she was on runs parallel with the highway. But it's the media that's linking Dina's case right away to the other murdered females, right, that we've already talked about. An article in the Province, again, starts questioning this idea of a serial killer for the deaths of Roxanne and Alicia, and another 18-year-old named Monica McKay, who's not involved in the investigation tears at all. Her body was discovered right away, but they're wondering if those 4 are connected. Right. So all over the place, people are connecting different women or girls.
Yeah.
Because it's happening so often. Dina's parents are not sure if their daughter should be included or not. I mean, they have no way of knowing. But having her added would bring more attention and more resources to her case. In 2009, Paula Bram told the Vancouver Sun, "I would have thought someone would have been arrested in a year, but it's been 10 years. It's exhausting. It takes your life away."
Yeah, there's no better way to put it.
And this is where we'll stop today. Next week, we will talk about the women and girls who went missing in the early 2000s, as well as some of the activism and calls to action the families and communities have taken upon themselves in an attempt to facilitate change. Like before, if you have any information on any of the cases mentioned today, please contact the E-PANA Tip Line at 1-877-543-4822. So, what do you think? What are your final words?
I mean, it's just, again, we know that the most that can be done is always within 48 hours. And so just hoping law enforcement does better today, or people are learning that it's worth acting, quote, dramatic or overreacting to say hey, this person's missing and we need to look right now, because that's the best time to find them. Almost in every single case that we talked about today, there was a pause, at least for the police, to really get involved. And it's crippling the case.
Yeah. And you need resources.
Yeah. I just can't. It's just cruel. These communities have just layer after layer after layer of trauma. Yeah. And it's just so fucked up.
Yes. Agreed. Well, before we get into who should listen, you didn't skip a tea. You have been drinking a tea this whole time, but these are more serious episodes for us. So tell us about what tea you've been drinking and what you thought of it.
I have been drinking Tribal Tea Co.'s Juniper-Berry loose leaf tea. It's owned by the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. I'm not sure if I'm saying that first word right. And packed with love there. It's a native company. From native roots, tea as it should be, natural and delicious. Sip well, feel well.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a really nice tea. I'm always a little nervous around fruity teas if they're not chilled.
Yeah.
But this one was earthy enough that it kind of felt like a hug during this whole thing. I could imagine some of the girls sitting around the fire, this would be a very nice tea. It has that earthiness and then the light fruit notes at the end. So I could imagine.
Nice.
It's a woodsy feel.
Is it a woodsy thumbs up?
It is a woodsy thumbs up.
Hey, we got there. Nice. All right, great. And who should listen to today's episode?
Police, judges, everybody in the system, that court system, people in the area.
Right?
You never know, like a shred of evidence or witnesses can come back and help.
Yeah, so these cases are getting more recent as we move along.
Yeah. So you could help give peace to some of these families. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be back next week with, I think, the final portion of this, part 3. And we'll cover the more recent cases, as well as there's still a few that aren't on the list or happened in the past that we'll circle back to for a moment. And again, we'll do the tea review at the end for that one. And then after that, we'll go back to our regular format of chaos up front. But you can find us on all the platforms at
Tea Time Crimes.
You can email us at
teatimecrimes@gmail.com.
Please rate, review, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please send us recommendation for teas and crimes. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.